Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russia-Ukrainian war. And we've had a lot of discussions and talk about the weapon systems that are being provided by the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the United States, to Ukraine. And I think at this point, based on some new information that is coming in, that is in all probability dated information. But it is now safe to say that the United States, that NATO, at this point, no weapon system is off the table that is being handed over to the Ukrainians. Now, we understand today, within the last 24 hours, that the Brimstone 2 is being supplied to the Ukrainians. Now, we understand that they are using these in a surface-to-surface launch mode. Ordinarily speaking, they are launched from aircraft, and they hit ground-based targets. But this weapon system, especially the Brimstone 2, you are talking about the apogee of Western technology. You are looking at a system that is probably one of the most advanced weapon systems that is being deployed by Western nations that we know about, that we haven't, that is open source information. Now, on the surface, it just appears to be a air-to-ground, anti-tank, anti-vehicle, anti-bunker weapon system. But there's a lot more to this weapon system than just being a so-called laser-guided. It is actually a dual-function, in some cases a tri-function system. Yes, it can use a laser designator to hit targets. It also uses GPS and an inertia navigation system to self-guide itself to a target area. Once it's in a target area, it has the ability to use a millimetric wave radar system that searches for, identifies, and then attacks ground targets. The CPU and the radar system on this missile is incredibly advanced. It has the ability to distinguish between tanks, armored fighting vehicles, trucks, prioritize, and then engage those systems. So the Ukrainians could launch the Brimstone many miles from the front line. The missile then travels, let's say, over this area, and then starts looking for Russian tanks, Russian T-72 Bravo 3s, Russian T-80s, Russian T-90s, BMP-3s, BMP-2s, BMP-1s, BTR-80s, BTR-82s, self-propelled howitzers, self-propelled artillery pieces, multiple launch rocket systems. Then once it has spotted said system, the Brimstone 2 then attacks it fully autonomously. The Ukrainians just need to simply launch the missile in the direction in which United States sensor devices have identified areas of Russian activity. Then launch the Brimstone 2 in that direction, and it is incredibly accurate, incredibly proficient at what it does, and that's killing vehicles in many cases that are concealed. with foliage that are in firm positions that can't be hit necessarily with direct ground-to-ground fire. Now, at the same time, we have also talked about the possibility that the Ukrainians would receive the ATACMS, and the United States is saying, no, the Ukrainians are not receiving the ATACMS. But that does not stop the United States or other NATO nations or Ukraine from purchasing very similar systems from Turkey. Turkey has an incredibly advanced military-industrial ability. And in all likelihood, very, very similar systems are being produced in terms of long-range, very precision-guided ballistic missiles being produced in Turkey, very much the same as the United States. Very similar systems. So some of these attacks that we have seen by the Ukrainians hitting deep inside of Russian territory, such as targets near Sevastopol, remember the air base attacks? It doesn't mean necessarily they are ATACMS. Doesn't necessarily mean it is a system handed over by the United States. It could very well be a Turkish system. I believe it's called the Bora. Let's search here real quick. Let's see, it's the Turkish semi-ballistic missile. Yeah, Bora is the name of it. And it's a tactical ballistic missile. It's developed by Roketsan, the same producer of the very, very effective MAM-L air-to-ground missile system that the TB2 Bayraktar uses. And for instance, the Bora has it's 2,500 kilograms, 610 millimeters, has a maximum range of 700 kilometers. The CEP is 10 meters. So in the case of this system right here, the Bora, it exceeds the range of the ATACMS. So just because the Ukrainians are not receiving officially the ATACMS, the bigger missile that can be supplied to the HIMARS, doesn't mean they're not getting systems very similar to the ATACMS and are using those systems. And it's got to be tough for Russia because, I mean, they're essentially fighting an army from the future right now, in some cases. The technology that the Russians are going against vastly surpasses some of the systems that the Russians are deploying on the battlefield. Now, I would say that's not in relation to the Bora or the ATACMS. The Russians have very similar systems that meet or match the effectiveness of the ATACMS, and that's the Iskander. They can hit exactly the same targets with their cruise missiles and Iskander weapon systems, just as effective. But we know for certain right now what the Russians do not possess is technology the likes of Brimstone 2. And it would be, I say at this point, it's highly likely that there are systems that are being deployed by the Central Intelligence Agency, U.S. Special Operations Command, that are pre-deployment, non-open source systems that are very likely being utilized in this conflict. I talked about before the probability of the F-35 over Ukraine. Again, I think 20 years, 10 years from now, we are going to find out that F-35s were over eastern Ukraine designating targets. Highly probable. Highly, highly probable at this point. But again, with the deployment of this Brimstone 2 to Ukraine, and again, they're talking about that it's being used surface to surface, which decreases its effective range. Its range launched from an aircraft is about 20 miles, rotary aircraft about 10 miles, meaning a helicopter. So some estimates 5 to 7 miles. But again, that's not to say that the Ukrainians aren't now deploying these things via helicopter. Wouldn't surprise me. Or fixed-wing aircraft. I mean, if they're launching anti-radiation missiles, then there's no reason they shouldn't be able to launch Brimstone as well. Or some fixed-wing aircraft has not been converted with the ability to launch the Brimstone. In all likelihood, right now, they're still launching them surface to surface. But the mere fact that they're there, the Brimstone 2 is there and being used. I mean, if we would go back to the start of this conflict, or before the start of this conflict, and we would have found out that the Ukrainians were receiving Brimstone 2s, that would have been massive news in the military world. Huge news. But I don't believe at this point there is anything that is not being used by the Ukrainians. The Hellfire has been deployed by the Norwegians and have been handed over to the Ukrainians. Obviously, they have the Javelin, the In-Law, the TOW is now being provided, the TOW 2. Tough situation for Russia. Very tough situation. And the simple fact that the Ukrainians can now send troops to Poland, to Romania, to the United Kingdom, and have those troops train in safety and then be redeployed to Ukraine is incredible. It's hard to believe Russia has not escalated this war as of yet. But, again, it's very, very likely we could see it escalate, meaning the conflict. At some point, Russia is going to have no choice, given what's happening on the ground. But very interesting development that the Brimstone 2 is now deployed. Not only that, they've handed over the Ukrainians the AMRAAM. It's a ground launch version. But even in our closest relationship with Egypt, to my knowledge, the AMRAAM was never handed over to the Egyptians. Now, obviously, the Israelis definitely don't want the Egyptians to get a hold of the AMRAAM. But the Ukrainians have it and are using it in a ground launch role, and it's has incredible accuracy. And reports right now it's having a 99 to 100% effectiveness in terms of intercepting Russian cruise missiles that system is engaging. So very interesting news. We'll continue to monitor, cover, and report on what's happening on the ground. Obviously, very, very heavy fighting is continuing in the east. The Russians continue pounding away towards Bakhmut. Again, are on the outskirts of Bakhmut as we speak, have been on the outskirts of Bakhmut for some time. but a continued, incredibly intense level of warfare that we are seeing in this conflict, and all probability will continue for some time. Thanks for joining us today. More to come. Have a good day.